I had met my best friend in first grade. So we'd been friends for 3 years. We were playing in her backyard on her swings, and she goes, "Sylvia, I have a confession." And I'm thinking, like, what are you going to say? And she goes, "This whole time I thought you were Mexican." It's so diverse, even though we share so many similarities. And so that's what this story is about, is just embracing the shared similarities, but then also honoring my family's roots, claiming both cultures. When I read a book to a kid, who's from India or Ethiopia or Puerto Rico, and they see their culture on the page, like they see either the food or like something about the music or the way they dress, their eyes light up. I think back, like when I was growing up in elementary school, I can't remember a teacher sharing about a bicultural kid. I didn't see that in picture books. I didn't see Central American culture or South American culture in a picture book. It wasn't until probably 6 or 7 years ago. And I was just like, I think it healed part of me, because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is out here, but why is it not available at a bookstore? That is the urgency.
Hola, and welcome back to the Latina Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Diaz, and in today's episode, we're sitting down with Sylvia Gallardo, an educator, author, and proud daughter of immigrants. She spent nearly 2 decades in the classroom supporting multilingual learners, and now she's about to release her bilingual picture book, I Am From Aquí and Allá. We talk about growing up between two worlds, why representation in children's literature matters, and what it means to finally see yourself in a story. So let's head to the conversation.
Hi, Andrea. My name is Sylvia Gallardo, and I am an educator. I've been in education for 18 years, and I am writing my first children's picture book called I Am From Aquí and Allá. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share my writing journey and to share what it's been like, just throughout the whole process.
Yeah, I'm super excited, especially, seeing your background and seeing everything you've done to get to your point. And, you mentioned your upcoming book is titled I Am From Aquí and Allá. And can you share what inspired you to write it and why telling this story feels so urgent?
Yes. So my dad immigrated from Ecuador when he was 19 years old. And my mom, she immigrated from El Salvador when she was about 18. And so they met in New York, actually in an ESL class. So, which is really neat because it's kind of, fast forward now, I'm an ESL teacher. So, um, they met, and years later I was born, and my dad's first job was in Juarez, Mexico. And
Wow.
so we moved to the border city of El Paso. And if anyone has ever been to El Paso or talked to somebody from El Paso, we are very proud to be from El Paso. And it has such a rich Mexican culture, right?
Mhm.
So growing up there, having two different cultures at home, and then also just embracing the culture in my city was very special and such a unique experience. So, I would go to school and I would hear different Spanish words, and I'd come home, and then my mom and dad would always like playfully debate of what Spanish word to use because the language is, it's all Spanish, but the language is different. And just in experiencing the food, my mom and my grandmother would cook Salvadoran food in the kitchen, pupusas,
Yeah.
plátano fritos. And then my dad constantly played Ecuadorian music. And so, but then we go out in public, and, we have mariachis and we have, the traditions, of I had a quinceañera. And so at a very early age, like I was navigating all of these cultures, and so this is where that story was inspired by, because at an early age, I felt, okay, I'm a part of this world. I feel very Salvadoran and I feel very Ecuadorian, right?
Mhm.
And so it was kind of just embracing that identity and embracing both cultures. And that's where the title comes from. I'm from here and I'm also from there. And um, I think when I think back about like a certain moment, I was in third grade and I had met my best friend in first grade. So we'd been friends for 3 years. We were playing in her backyard on her swings, and she goes, Sylvia, I have a confession. And I'm thinking, like, what are you gonna say? And she goes, this whole time I thought you were Mexican.
Oh my god.
we we like bursted out laughing. It was such a funny moment, right? And
Yeah.
we talk about it now. And so that's where this, this um complexity of like being Latino, right? It's not, how can I say that? It's like it's so diverse, like
Mhm.
within the Latino community, even though we share so many similarities. And so that's what the story is about, is just embracing the shared similarities, but then also honoring my family's roots, right? And claiming both cultures.
No, I love that too. I also am part Salvadorian.
No way.
Yeah, yeah. From my mom's side, my dad technically is also born in El Salvador, but he most of his family's in Mexico. So it's like that that you're trying to fit in, and then obviously when you're born here too, it can feel like that disconnected. Like, okay, I love my culture, but I'm also part of this culture. But
Uh,
how do I? And especially especially when you're young, you feel kind of like thrown out of the loop. You're just like, okay, like my family does this thing, but like I have this whole different culture, outside of that, like, at school or, hanging out with friends. Sometimes you can feel like, wow, we're kind of we're kind of
I
in
know.
different worlds.
Where do we fit in? Like, where do we
Yeah.
belong? And I think that's where the urgency came to write, to write a picture book, to write a story, because I think back, like when I was growing up in elementary school, I can't remember a teacher sharing about a bicultural kid. I didn't see that in picture books. I didn't see Central American culture or South American culture in a picture book. It wasn't until probably 6 or 7 years ago where I picked up a picture book, and it was from an Ecuadorian um, author.
Oh, wow.
And I was just like, I think it healed a
Yeah.
part of me, because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is out here, but why is it not available at a bookstore, right?
Yeah.
So that is the urgency, is for, you know, I guess sharing that story for other bicultural kids, because it's so common among
Yeah.
community, right?
Yeah.
A kid who grows up with a parent from Peru and then another parent from the Dominican,
Yeah.
it's just, and as I've had these conversations with people, they realize it too. They're like, you know what, you're right. Like, this is so common, but there's no picture book to reference to or to read to kids to kind of share that experience.
Yeah, no, and I really like that, your book brings this topic into like, the forefront, because like it is like such a hard topic to like even like go about, because like even we sometimes will get confused, like, oh my god, like you're right. But like how do we go about like healing from that, or from understanding like, no, we're part of both. We fit into both of these. It doesn't have to separate us or disjoint us because we're part of both.
Right, right. I think that's the most important thing. I had recently met a friend who told me something that was just so impactful and stayed with me. And it said, I think she said, you don't have to feel less than. You don't have to say, I'm 50-50, you
Yeah.
know? And when she said that, I realized, you know what? When I'm, eating pupusas or like with my mom,
Mhm.
I feel 100% Salvadoran.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm not 50, I'm not less. And when I'm with my dad and he's playing his Ecuadorian instruments and that music is playing and we're dancing, I feel 100% Ecuadorian. And so when
Yeah.
she told me that, and this is, I'm in my 40s now, like just realizing this. And so it's been such a special journey to just, keep learning.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad your friend like offered those comforting words, because sometimes our friends give us like they don't think, like they're like, oh, like I just said that, because it came up to mind. But I'm like, bro, like you helped me out so much just by
Yeah.
being there and hearing me out, and then giving me that type of response is just appreciative, like. But I'm
Yeah.
glad. In terms of, you spent 18 years in education, and with the last 5, as an ESL specialist, how has your work with multilingual learners shaped the way you think about, representation and identity?
I would say it has been so influential in the last, I would say, I mean, when I became an ESL teacher, it was like 5 years ago. But
Mhm.
even just being in the classroom for so long and teaching different students from various cultural backgrounds, I started to realize, there are not a lot of books out there, right?
Yeah.
And especially working with our multilingual learners, I've started to be more intentional of finding books that represent their culture.
Mhm.
And the sad part is that I'd go to half price books, I'd go to Barnes and Noble, and they're not there.
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so I've had to go on to social media platforms, to find, diverse authors and like order their books, for my students. And what I realize is when I read a book to a kid, who's from India or Ethiopia or Puerto Rico,
Mhm.
and they see their culture on the page, like they see either the food or like something about the music or the way they dress, their eyes light up.
Yeah.
Like, and they get so excited. They stand up from their chair, they raise their hand because they know and they recognize that and they want to share. And
Aw.
so that is probably what has inspired so much of my journey, and because I realized how impactful that is for students,
Mhm.
because it seriously builds confidence in them. Maybe a child who necessarily won't speak up in class, but when they see that in a book, it's life-changing and it brings so much joy. So, my my school has been open for about 9 years.
Mhm.
We opened the school and I started realizing how diverse it was. And so I organized their first multicultural event. And I was scared at first. I didn't know what the turnout was going to be like. I didn't know if families were going to show up or anything, but I went with it. I knew we had to do this, especially for the community, just to know how diverse the school is.
Yeah.
And it was great. We had a lot of turnout. Families showed up with their traditional dress, their traditional clothing, their food, their music. There was dancing in the gym.
Yeah.
And yeah, and the kids were so joyous and like sharing with their classmates like where they're from. And
Mhm.
they were teaching them like with their poster boards and everything. But what was so interesting about the whole experience was not the night, it was the day after. The day after was the one that will always forever be like in my mind, because the day after, my ESL students and even other students who participated who are not in the ESL program, um, I felt that they were walking down those hallways with their chin up and a little bit more,
Aw.
you know?
Yeah.
And so they were all raving about how great the night was, and all the kids who didn't make it, they were asking questions. They were like, "What are you talking about? What did we miss?" And so they would say like, "Oh yeah, we tried, so and so's food last night, or we tried so and so's coffee and it was amazing." And so they had an opportunity to talk about their culture and to be a little bit more confident. And so I think that has all shaped and influenced and kind of like the driving force for me
Mhm.
to keep going. Anytime I get doubts or I feel insecure, I just think about those moments and they reassure me to like keep going and keep sharing the story and keep writing.
No, I love that, and I'm so proud of you too for taking that initiative, to like, we're gonna do a multicultural event, we're gonna do it, especially, having it been like the first one, right, of its kind, at the school, and it really does happen, like I remember having like something similar happen in like college where you did like a multicultural event, and you can tell like people like especially like explaining their culture or bringing somebody like, hey, try this, like you've never tried it, like, oh my god, it's amazing. And
Yeah.
it builds a community because you would think, oh, like, oh, be separate type of thing because it's different cultures, but no, I think it builds a community together, and also we see our similar, or, what we're similar in, or differences, and then it just helps us feel more connected to each other, like, okay, like I really appreciate what you're doing in your culture, or like that's amazing, or like, oh my god, I never tasted this food, but I'm gonna be craving this for the rest of the time. But yeah, no, I'm so glad. I know those kids are like, yeah, I'm gonna flex my culture. Let's go.
Yeah, they're super excited. It happens in April, and so we're getting ready. But yeah, you're right. It brings understanding,
Mhm.
to a lot of other students, and I think that affirmation and like that validation of like who they are, like it does so much for them.
Yeah, and I'm glad that experience also, helps build out, your journey to this book. And it's just really, like sometimes you don't realize the small things in life or the ongoing things that happen in life or those initiatives you take lead you up to something you didn't know or you've been wanting to work for.
Yeah,
So I'm
no,
really, really
definitely.
glad for that.
Yeah.
And you chose to self-publish, which is a very daring step. And can you walk us through that decision, what the journey has been like bringing that book to life on your own terms?
Yes. So I did quite a bit of research comparing, the pros and cons of going um, the traditional route versus the self-publishing route. And I don't know if it's just my impatience or to be honest, like, because I was like, we got to get this story out. And
Yeah.
I can't wait 3, 4, 5, 6 years because I've heard, it takes a long time to get representation, to get a literary agent.
Yeah.
I've heard it takes 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
Oh my god.
And I was kind of like, I don't have that time. I mean, I'm not putting it off. I mean, if traditional publishing does come my way, I'm open to it.
Mhm.
Um, and so I feel like self publishers, there's a lot of differences, right? You are doing everything.
Yeah.
You are upfronting the cost. Um, you're doing your own marketing. You're doing your own branding. But what I do like about it is you have creative control
Yeah.
and you can hire who you want to be your illustrator. You can hire who your editor is. And I feel like in doing that, you kind of have like a little team going who are also investing in your story and want to see your story be successful. I've heard that in traditional publishing, you write your manuscript, right? And your
Mhm.
literary agent has to pitch it to editors and marketers to see if it'll sell. And that does take a long process. And when it gets to who gets to illustrate it or how it's marketed, yes, the publishing houses are upfronting those costs, right? And so
Mhm.
you don't have to upfront the money, but you get less control.
Oh.
So that's a major, like, I feel like for me, like that was kind of like a major tipping point to go self-publishing because I wanted an illustrator who would understand uh, our cultures. And so with that, I was able to hire an an Ecuadorian illustrator. Her name is Nadia Ronquillo.
Oh.
Yeah, so I knew that she would do it justice, that she would put her heart into it because, it's her culture as well. So I think there's a lot of pros and cons either way.
Mhm.
It just depends, on what, how you want to go about your journey. There's a lot of learning as I
Yeah.
move forward, and a lot of research, but I'm excited about it. I come home from work and I work on it a little bit more. There's always something every day to like learn about how to self-publish, how to market, how to get out there. But I would say the coolest thing out of this whole self-publishing journey would be just the community that I found.
Oh.
I did not expect to be surrounded with other self-publishers, to make connections at all these book fairs that we have in Dallas, like the lit. What is it called? Lit Fest,
Mhm.
Books on Tap. All of these markets around the Dallas area. It's just so neat to connect with so many uh, authors, self-published authors, book lovers, just and then you can also kind of you have more control over your profit. I think that's
Mhm.
uh another pro is you can set your prices how you want them, you can market it the way you want it. So I think that also plays into deciding which way to go.
No, and I love that he brought the both comparisons too, because I know a lot of our listeners are gonna be curious, like, what's the difference?
Yeah.
And I really like that, especially for I feel like for our stories too, being told we have to have that control over it. So, I like especially the story, your book. I feel like it's makes it more meaningful when you have like most of the control. You got the Ecuadorian like illustrator. You're controlling how it's being marketed and how much it's going to cost, because it feels kind of sometimes like your baby is like out of place if you let somebody else take control of it.
Yeah.
So no, I appreciate you going into detail, like comparing difference. Obviously, one could work for another. It just depends. Obviously, also it depends on the story you're doing as well. But yeah, I'm glad you went with self publishing, because I do believe like this story needs to be out there, and like kids need to see themselves represented like with their stories too, since it's kind of
Yeah.
uncommon.
No, yeah, and I think the other influencing factor for going self-publishing is also just looking at the statistics and the data for Latinx publishers.
Mm,
It's I think 6 or 7% of people in the publishing industry who identify as Latinx,
mm.
and you know I almost kind of felt like, I don't know, that's a very we're like 20% of the population, right? So
Yeah.
obviously there's an underrepresentation
Hmm.
in the publishing industry, and so to get into that traditional publishing industry seems out of reach,
Yeah.
right? So I don't think it's impossible. I
Yeah.
think I think in the last few years there has been an increase, and I feel like our stories are probably now being told by ourselves,
Yeah.
and there are more authors that are coming out that are writing more stories like that. So I'm not against traditional publishing whatsoever, and I do hope that maybe one day like that will happen. So we'll see.
Yeah, no, and you also made a point, that and especially like when you first introduced yourself to and when you sent your request to be part of the podcast, that you support a lot of Latina small owned businesses. And did that come like, growing up and seeing small business owners, or like was it like, I got to support a community that's, trying to prove themselves that yes, we're here and we can own our businesses.
Yeah, so I think it goes hand in hand.
Mhm.
At first I was, I was thinking like how does this connect? Because that's such a great question. I had to think about it. And I do think it goes hand in hand because being a Latina, being a writer, my main focus was like I want other Latinas to know that this is possible,
Yeah.
right? But then I was also in community with others, who are Latinas, who are owning businesses and who are leading with their culture.
Yeah.
And I started to realize like we're doing the same thing, right? Just in different forms,
Mhm.
and I felt like for them, like they are business owners, and they're also showing other Latinas that you could be your own boss, right? So
Yeah.
I feel like in that sense, like it goes hand in hand, and it makes me want to support them too because visibility is very important,
Yeah.
right? So and I now value products and things that have stories behind them that share pride in the culture. So that's my mission also is to go into the community, support Latina owned businesses, small businesses who are leading with culture, who are leading with pride, um, because I feel like I'm doing the same thing. So,
Hey, let's go get it. Yeah, I feel like we have to support the culture. We even if it's
yes,
like, even though I've seen like small businesses from like different cultures, like I always go to support. I'm like, hey, like we gotta help each other out, because as a community, especially we're minorities, we have to stand
yes,
together and give support and show like, hey, y'all are being successful. We're gonna help you keep being successful.
right. And I feel like we don't succeed individually,
Yeah.
right? I feel like we succeed, and when we succeed, it is for the community.
Yeah.
Uh, so I value that.
Yeah, this is just like coming up for me, but like going back to like comparing like self-publishing towards the traditional route. What is something you wish the traditional route understood more, especially the demand for Latino books and representation? What do you feel like is like something that's kind of missing in that traditional sense, where it's harder for us to get in?
I think the one is the bicultural experience,
Hmm.
right? I think more books that show more of the complexity of being Latino, right?
Hmm.
That we all just don't fit in one box. I think I would love to see that increase in children's books. I think also just like navigating the road to being traditionally published. I feel like I would love more, just more information out there. So, yeah, just more access, I guess.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I do agree there needs to be more access or more understanding. And what do you hope for this first release for your book? What do you hope will happen? Or obviously this is us, looking into the future. But what do you hope for it to do for our community?
Yeah, specifically for the Latino community, I do hope that this book just kind of shares that celebration of, of similarities, right?
Mhm.
And then I think specifically for, Ecuadorian culture, Salvadorian culture, like for them to see themselves represented in a picture book, right?
Mhm.
I feel like there's a very unique and special distinctiveness, with our food, our music, our rhythm, el sazon, like everything
Yeah.
is different. And I feel like that needs to be celebrated, right?
Mhm.
But even not just for the Latina community, I think these bicultural books should be for other students, right? So they
Mhm.
can kind of get a peek into what our world is like, right?
Yeah.
Because we need stories. And I feel like we understand each other better when we share stories.
Yeah.
And I think it also builds not only confidence, but I think with other kids, it builds empathy. And I feel like my hope would be that if, once this book is out, that kids and adults who read it just get the message that they should be proud of who they are and where they come from, no matter where that is.
No, I love that. I love that. And you mentioned just for a little tidbit for our listeners, this is Sylvia's first podcast experience, and you've already done an amazing job, by the
Oh,
way.
thank you. Oh, thank you.
But
Yeah.
how does it feel now? Like I feel like this is just a great way to like get your background, get the behind the scenes of what goes into like self publishing your book.
I, this is my first podcast, like you said. And, at first it's like, oh my gosh, can I speak? I don't know if I could speak, but the fact that it's very, like, just a relaxed conversation,
Yeah.
is helping a lot. I appreciate like any opportunity I get to talk about this. I think it's important. I think, talking about representation, especially now in this climate, is
Yeah.
so important. And I do want to talk about the Bad Bunny halftime show.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Because,
I was about to ask, like, is there anything that you've been wanting to talk about? We can talk about it right now.
yeah, because the connection to like writing picture books, like with the halftime show,
Yeah.
we definitely have to get into it.
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
yeah, because, yeah, talking about representation in children's literature, I feel it's so important, right?
Mhm.
Because they're when they're young, like they're so formidable and so impressionable. And I feel like we need to do a better job um, of just exposing them to more diverse stories and more multicultural stories because I honestly feel like that's where it starts, right? That's where it starts, where you start to build confidence in who you are and to have pride in who you are.
Mhm.
And so I think championing that representation in the classrooms and in libraries is super important.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. Somebody needs to do a picture book for Bad Bunny's halftime show because it's so amazing, and I feel like seeing representation even from all avenues, seeing that such a big platform because we see it in music. People will listen to Bad Bunny's music. I don't understand what he's saying, but I love what he's doing, right? And
Yeah.
just getting because we have to like for us to get that representation, we have to support it from all angles, be it news, be it music, being pop culture, be writing literature, books. Um, and just yeah, no, I agree with you though. Like I was like, that was such a good halftime. Oh my god.
Okay, so I'm watching the show, right?
Yeah.
And I'm looking at all of these elements, all of these Latino symbols, right?
Yeah.
And I'm pointing to the TV and I'm like telling my husband, I'm like, that was me. That's look, I was falling asleep, at the wedding, in the middle of a big party, right? And at the very end, when all the flags came out, right?
Yeah.
And he started naming all of the countries. And when he named Ecuador and he named El Salvador, I stood up and I was
Yeah.
like, what? We got, that's me, right?
Mhm.
And then when all of the social media posts started flooding through of like families reacting to
Yeah.
hearing their country and to hear and to seeing their flag being flown, right?
Mhm.
I made the connection that's what my students feel. Like that's what
Yeah.
kids feel when they see a book that represents their culture. So if we are all adults and we are reacting to seeing our culture on the TV screen, how impactful that is for, adults who are feeling this pride, right? This
Yeah.
orgullo for the world to see our flag or just validation of like who we are. And to me, I'm like, that's the mission here. That's the goal here with this kind of book.
Yeah, no, and I love that. It's just like also seeing that you're like, oh my god, like that's me. Like that's the motion. That's the what we want to invoke when we're trying to develop that representation. Show people like, hey, you're here. We
Yeah,
exist.
we're here. Yeah, that's the thought that came to my mind is like we're here. And I think about, the work that I do on the daily, like I think about little Sylvia in
Mhm.
elementary school. Like what if there was a teacher who showed South American culture in a book or Central American? Like what would that have done for little Sylvia? Like maybe I would have walked into rooms more confidently if I was, the only Latina. Maybe I would have had more confidence in my own voice, right? So
Mhm.
I think it's just super important.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm gonna go to our last question, and it's a question our founder Angelica Casares always likes to ask when she does an interview, and I like to ask this one too, which is, do you consider yourself a leader? Why or why not?
I think my journey to considering myself a leader has taken a long time.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm normally shy, introverted, don't normally speak up in meetings, but I feel like in the last 6 or 7 years, my job has given me plenty of opportunity to, give professional training at a district level to share about our multilingual learners. And I feel like all of these experiences have kind of just built up to kind of help me with that confidence to say, you know what, like I am a leader in education, leading these students to not just academically, um, you know, but also to just learn how to preserve their culture, like learn how to preserve their first language as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think now I consider myself a leader in that sense. But it's taken me a long road, a long road to get here to finally say, yes, like I am a Latina, I am a leader in education. And so that's why I feel like I align myself with your guys' values,
Yeah.
just inspiring other women and inspiring others to thrive and lead.
Yes. Yeah, no, for sure. And as we are ending this, and this was amazing conversation. Thank you for this because I feel like our listeners are really gonna enjoy this one. Where can our listeners find you, and when is the book gonna release? Where can they find to purchase a book?
Yeah. Okay. So you can follow me on Instagram at stories by Sylvia Gallardo. I'm also on TikTok under that same tag. And you'll find my link to my website there. You can subscribe, sign up so that you can get first announcements of pre-orders and the release date. So I don't have a specific release date, but it will be released by April.
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah,
Super
April or
excited.
May, so definitely before June.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Sylvia, for this conversation. Thank you so much for, being inspiration for other Latina writers. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andrea.
All right. Hasta la próxima, amigas. We'll see y'all. Bye. Today, Sylvia reminded us that the stories we tell our children matter. That growing up between two worlds isn't something to overcome, it's something to celebrate. And that writing your own story, literally or figuratively, is one of the most powerful things you can do. You can find Sylvia's book, I Am From Aquí and Allá, on sylviagallardo.com. And if you're an educator looking to bring more bilingual books into your classroom, follow her on social media for recommendations. Thank you for listening. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with another amiga, leave us a review, and tell us what you want to hear next. I'm Andrea Diaz, and this is the Latina Leadership Podcast. Nos vemos!